Hi, everybody. I want to talk today about a comedy film that's not really so much straight comedy as comedy drama or dark comedy, comedy that turns serious, that kind of thing. It's a movie from the 1970s, and I have a history that I want to talk about leading up to the review. And I'm talking about this movie that's very forgotten today. It's called Law and Disorder, starring Carroll O'Connor and Ernest Borgnine. And I'm going to tell you the history first. The way I first discovered this film, well, it came out in 1974 in the theaters. And back around 1975, my relatives had home box office, HBO, cable TV. Never saw anything like it back then. I was just a kid. I was around 12, 13. And it was the most amazing thing to be able to turn on your television set, and there you had movies that were in the theater right there in your living room. It was a big deal back at the time. And also for a kid like me, you weren't used to seeing any nudity. You weren't used to seeing anything like really violent. Weren't used to hearing swear words and curses, things like that. This particular movie, although it's comical in a way, is rated R. Okay, so it was pretty heavy at the time. Now, my memory of it was that we would watch it several times on TV from HBO as a kid in around 1975. And back then, I remember it being very, very funny, very humorous. But what it was that just the kind of family I had. I had like a family. These were Italian people, a lot of them, and they were New Yorkers, and they thought this was funny stuff. I remembered it as being a really good movie as a kid. I caught it a couple of times since then in more recent years in the 21st century, and it doesn't hold up as good, but it's still worth watching, and I'm going to talk about it. First of all, this is a very hard movie to find. This is a DVD that I finally acquired. It came out, this DVD did, in the year, I think, 2000, the early days of DVD. And came out from a company called Anchor Bay. Some of you may remember Anchor Bay. There's a picture of the Carroll O'Connor and Ernest Borgnine, but there's the Anchor Bay symbol there. And it's very hard to find because it's never been issued any other way. This is one of those very elusive movies. It's forgotten, really. This never came out again on any other format. It never came out again on DVD, never came out on Blu-ray. This is the only release of this. So it's been very hard to get. And over the years, the prices have been ridiculous, like $100 for this thing. Used. Even to find a used disc, it would be like $75. I was lucky to score a sealed copy. It was sealed and never opened. It still had that name tag on the top that you got to strip off and everything. It was sealed, never opened. I got it for $45, which to me was a good deal. All right, let's talk about the movie, Law and Disorder. It was advertised on TV with the trailers and the TV promos as a pure comedy. And the cast, first of all, just having Ernest Borgnine and Carroll O'Connor together was a joy, and is still a joy. That's the best thing about the movie, having Borgnine and O'Connor together. Now, Carroll O'Connor was, of course, starring as Archie Bunker from the great sitcom All in the Family at this time. So he kind of like took a break in the middle of All in the Family to do this movie. But he still was very much known as Archie Bunker. And in this film, Carroll O'Connor speaks and acts very much like Archie. He's not really as bigoted as Archie in the movie, but you feel like you're watching Archie Bunker. Very hard to this day, whether I'm watching Carroll O'Connor in the TV show In the Heat of the Night or anything different. It's very hard for me to see him as anybody other than Archie. He's just very typecast to me. Anyway, that's one of the joys of seeing the two of them. The story is not really much of a story. That's the whole thing. The situation is that they're living in New York City in the mid-70s, and New York City back then was really crime-infested. There was a lot of muggings, there was a lot of rape, a lot of drugs, a lot of garbage strewn everywhere. They got it cleaned up eventually, the city, and these days, as I make this video in 2022, from what I understand, it's not doing too well again. But yeah, if there's one thing to be said about Law and Disorder, it captures a time capsule of the gritty, dirty, grungy New York that was in 1974. So for people who like that, to see New York in all its glory, so to speak, you've got this movie. So in the movie, these two characters are going through all kinds of problems. I mean, they're getting robbed. You see, Ernest Borgnine is a hair salon owner. He actually styles women's hair, and he owns a beauty parlor. And Borgnine goes in, and he's only in there for like a minute, 2 minutes tops, and his car, been parked outside, gets completely stripped and junked by a bunch of thugs. By the time he comes out, there's a scene where you have, meanwhile, in his apartment building, you have Carroll O'Connor is watching a baseball game on TV, and he takes a moment to go in the kitchen to make himself a sandwich. By the time the sandwich is finished and he comes back, somebody has come through the window and stolen his television set. And then things happen, like there's, of course, muggings, and Carroll O'Connor's daughter, played by Leslie Ackerman. You may not know her by name. She was in Hardcore, and she did a lot of other appearances too. This is her first film, Leslie Ackerman. She plays the daughter who gets hooked on drugs, and there's all kinds of dealers and lowlifes. It's a really ugly kind of scenario, but they're so fed up with it all that they decide, these two guys, they're going to form, or Borgnine really is the head guy, the head honcho, wants to form an auxiliary police thing, or join, I should say, an auxiliary police association where they can put uniforms on. They look like they're real cops. They don't have guns, but they carry a baton with them that they can use, and they have to notify the police if there's any problems. Now, with this scenario, they get a few other friends. One of the friends is played by Jack Kehoe, who people may recognize as, I think, Joe Erie from the movie The Sting. A lot of these people are familiar. Like Carroll O'Connor's wife, for example, is played by Anne Wedgeworth, who you may know mostly from Three's Company. She plays Lana, who's always after Jack Tripper. You'll recognize a lot of faces from the 70s here. It's another plus to this. But as I'm saying, these guys have become auxiliary cops. They're trying to protect the neighborhood. They drive and cruise around. They even get a car that's not a police car, but it looks like a police car. And Borgnine manages to get a siren that spins and sounds around so they can go riding through the streets like real cops. And I guess the premise of the film is, although there's no real plot to this thing, it's just scenarios and things going on here and there all over the place, kind of jumbled. The idea basically is that what starts out as just having a little fun and trying to do a little something turns out a lot more serious than they bargained for, and I'll leave it at that. You know, the end parts of this movie probably are the best parts, as things go from comical to really deadly serious kind of thing. So I find that interesting with this movie. I just felt that this didn't hold up. You know, after watching this, it didn't hold up as much as it did in the 70s, although I still feel that it's worth a look for sure. I mean, Carroll O'Connor and Ernest Borgnine as childhood friends, who are now, I guess, in their late 40s, early 50s in the movie, really have good chemistry together. Carroll O'Connor is a cab driver. As I said, Ernest Borgnine plays a hairstylist, and his business isn't doing too well, partly because, I should mention, don't forget, he has a really ditzy and belligerent female employee played by Karen Black. You may remember Karen Black, and she's really insane, and she drives all the customers away. She insults Borgnine's customers. She comes on to Borgnine and teases him and makes his life miserable and drives him crazy. But he can't fire her because it's hard to get a hairstylist as good as her these days when she feels like coming to work, which sometimes she doesn't even want to work. So this is like what I'm talking about with this movie. There's all kinds of things going on here with drug dealers, burglars, and street scum, and funny bits here, funny bits there, and I don't know, the editing probably isn't the best. I think some of these sequences could have been more effective if they were edited a little differently in different orders. there's something about it where, as I say, it doesn't all really come together. It's more like we're dealing with uh, a story that's really not practically existed and all over the place. I mean, there's golden moments that do show up in odd places here and there, but there's different and underdeveloped ideas too. There's a thing where Carroll O'Connor wants to try to convince his pal Ernest Borgnine to buy an old diner that the guy isn't having any success with, to try to make a business for themselves and get out of what they're doing and going in there. So there's pipe dreams and everything. I just think this could have come together a lot more solidly. I think, too bad, because there's a germ of a really good movie in here that just winds up being okay because of that. It's directed by Ivan Passer. Sorry if I pronounced that wrong. Sometimes that happens. And yeah, I still think, although I'm not really raving about this movie, it's worth a watch. If you're into 70s movies, New York City, Ernest Borgnine or Carroll O'Connor, or seeing old 70s people in this movie, the stars from the 70s, it's worth a watch. On a scale of 4 stars, I'd give Law and Disorder 2.5 out of 4. Thanks for watching.